Cyprus, the Counterintelligence Podcast, with your co-hosts, Jeremy Clark and Ryan Rambo.
We are live. Ryan Rambo, good afternoon. How are you doing, sir?
I am living the dream. Jeremy Clark, episode 1, the Cyprus Podcast, talking about everything counterintelligence. Jeremy, you and I are going to co-host a podcast. I mean, how did this thing come about?
Man, Ryan, I think this has been long in the doing, right? We've chatted about this for a couple of months now. What you were doing with unintelligence and then kind of transitioning and being a part of IXN with us, and the ability to outreach and network with counterintelligence and insider threat professionals and really connecting the force. Ryan, I think what we have, the start, is going to be pretty amazing. And CI Press, who can think of a better name? What did we try to use this 3 or 4 different times, and we finally settled on getting it?
We finally got something to fit. There's a long story behind Cyprus or CI Press, but yeah, finally it became a podcast. Initially, it was going to be a tech platform. Unfortunately, and there's about 50 other tech platforms with the name Cyprus, so it couldn't go that route. But it fits perfectly for the podcast. So, Jeremy, what's the goal of this podcast?
Yeah, really, Ryan, I think we're trying to connect the force, right? When I think counterintelligence and insider threat professionals, what we're going to talk about, and we have Scott as our inaugural guest. I'm really excited to get into his story, but it's just getting professionals who have done the work out there in the field, getting their experiences, talking about what they went through, how they got to where they were, some of the pitfalls that they had, so some of our viewers and listeners maybe could avoid. More importantly, looking for mentors out there. I've had several through my career, and hearing their stories and getting their advice helped me get through 26 years in the military. So I think, Ryan, connecting the force is pillar number 1 for us out there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. I mean, we have a next generation of counterintelligence professionals moving up, going to courses. I know personally some of the young agents that have just come into the field, and they're wide-eyed and excited to be in this MOS or in this field, and they just don't know where to go all the way. So, by talking about it, by having a podcast, giving them something to listen to, also introducing them to potential mentors and people that have been in the field for a very long time, I agree with you. Incredibly important. And I also think it's therapeutic for the members of the intelligence community and practitioners in counterintelligence to tell their stories. They've experienced so much. They shy away from the camera. They shy away from the mic. But we're going to drag them into this platform to tell their stories, no matter how uncomfortable it is. And Scott Sparks is shaking his head. You can't see it, but he does not feel comfortable doing this. But we're going to force him to. And through the course of the podcast and bringing in different guests from all of the different branches and services, it'll give everybody a well-rounded feeling for what counterintelligence is, both in government and the corporate space. So super excited to do this. Really excited with you on this, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be informative. It's going to be educational. And Ryan, it's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait. We've got a pretty good lineup, I think, in the works here the next couple of weeks. We're going to be busy. And I'm excited to get these individuals out of the shadows to tell their story.
So speaking of the shadows, the shadow master, Scott Sparks. So Scott. Oh, well, before we get to Scott, Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? We're going to dedicate the whole hour to Scott Sparks. But Jeremy, I want to hear your story in a nutshell.
My story in a nutshell. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Well, actually, it's about 10 miles past the middle of nowhere in Northeast Pennsylvania, population 14. There were 16 of us living there. I can't do math. That's how bad it was where I grew up. But I ended up joining the Army. I did 26 total years. 21 of those years was in counterintelligence at the strategic level, conducting, oversighting, mentoring, and leading strategic operations. A lot of fun. 26 years, 21 in CI. After I transitioned out, I jumped on board as a contractor on board a task force that was focused solely on identifying vendor solutions to make the Army better, faster, and stronger, and more lethal, the ISR task force. Did that for about 2 years, learned the Army acquisition process, recognized that there were several gaps within counterintelligence, and then had a couple beers and bourbon with Scott. So I think we can go after this and fill this void and fix it. And lo and behold, a year later, Ryan's on board with our team here, and we're getting after it. We're making a difference. It's been pretty fun thus far. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, for sure. So, just like you, 26 years in the Army, 16 years as a counterintelligence, professional, both as a special agent and then as a warrant officer. Retired in 2016 and broke entirely away from government, went the corporate route in the healthcare industry, stood up counterintelligence and insider threat programs in 2 different companies, and just fell in love with the corporate environment, the speed of it, the challenge of it all. That's where I want to stay. I mean, I love the government. I love government service, but the corporate environment is just so enticing to me. So it's a different problem set, and it's just been fantastic. And so when you and Scott asked me if I'd be willing to join forces with you, it's a no-brainer. You guys are 2 of the most talented counterintelligence professionals I've ever seen in the field. You had a year ahead of me in your company build up, and it was just a perfect fit. And oh, by the way, I just love you guys. I mean, we laugh all day long, and if you can't come to work and laugh, then why do it, right? And also, tackling very important problems to protect our clients' equity. So I just loved everything. And oh, by the way, and I'll add this as an extra, your company's name, IXN Solutions, it stands for Identify, Exploit, Neutralize. And that is so perfect from a counterintelligence standpoint. And it was a hell of a lot better than the name that I was going to come up for my company. So I had to join. It had to happen. So that's me.
I mean, Ryan, I can't wait to get these things kicked off. But, we got Scott here on the line. Mr. Sparks, Michael Scott Sparks, for those individuals who know him as Michael or Sparky. There's a lot of names out there. All of them are around being a professional, a mentor, and a subject matter expert. Probably the best one in the Army and at DIA through his career. So many stories. Scott, welcome. How are you doing, brother?
Oh, shucks, man. Hey, yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for twisting my arm and having me come on this thing. I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about, counterintelligence. That's near and dear to my heart.
Man, there's nobody more savvy out there than Scott Sparks. And I'm excited to get into your story. So, why don't we kick it off, Scott? Why don't you just kind of start from the beginning and, we'll pose questions throughout.
Yeah, keep me on track. Yeah, so I'm Scott Sparks. I go by my middle name. So first name is Michael. So some people know me as Mike, depending on where I was. I can usually tell by what you call me where I met you in my career. Yeah, so 36 years of federal service, 20 years, active duty, in the Army, and then 16 as a civil servant. And then our foray into the business world. So I guess I'll start my story. I'll set the base with my entry into the Army, right? So didn't start out as a CI guy, right? CI guy, came a little bit later, and certainly I made the right move doing that, right? Because I wouldn't have it any other way. In many ways, I wish I could have gotten there earlier, but it wouldn't. Things worked out just fine, is what it boils down to. So my original, I originally enlisted in the Army as a 31 Charlie. That's a rat rig operator, commo guy. And it was a mercenary move. I was looking, to fund my college education, and that was a big deal back then. It was kind of a new program, they would give you college money if you joined the Army, and it worked. Got the hook into me. I was pretty, I was eager to join the Army to get that taken care of. I really wanted to, get back into the college game. So I was looking to do, they also offered a 2-year enlistment, which, I don't even know if they do that anymore, but they offered it at the time, and I thought I would go ahead and jump on it. That narrowed down my list of potential, jobs to a very finite number. Or maybe it didn't. I think that was my first exposure to recruiting as a trade, and that recruiter worked his magic on me and sort of troop led me into the 31 Charlie commo field. There were a bunch of videos. It's kind of funny, story, but ultimately, I didn't want to be, commo seemed cool. The most cool commo job was certainly the rat rig operator. I didn't want to be running around in the mud, dragging a wire behind me. But funny story. I go through basic training, AIT, all that good stuff, get my dream assignment, that I wanted into Germany in the second ACR. I go over to the second ACR. They didn't have any rat rigs. So I ended up trudging around through the mud with wires anyway, is what it was.
That's too funny.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, went through, school to become a commo guy, learned to be a rat rig operator, went to the second ACR, got to the unit, awesome assignment, great dudes that I still hang out with to this day. And they didn't have a rat rig, right? So it was a brand new unit. They were just standing up. It was in the headquarters element. And I was the only commo guy. So I didn't have a rat rig. There was nothing there that I was trained on, but I was the commo guy. I was the whole commo section. It was just me. And so I had to, learn how to do all the commo things that were required, for this outfit. Right. So it was a brand new unit just standing up, as I said. So, they had new track vehicles, new Humvees were a brand new thing. They were just coming and roll in. And so they all had radios on them. None of them were, AM radios. They were all FM radios. I wasn't trained on any of this stuff. So, I kind of had to, take the systems that the Army had put in place, right? Got a bunch of books that tell you how to do stuff, fuel manuals, regulations, all that kind of good stuff. So I hit the books and, it wasn't rocket science. So I figured out how to install all those radios on those vehicles. And I, learned up how to, what the maintenance schedule for all of them was. And it didn't take me long to get, kind of a system put in place because I did all the research on the policy and procedures, to where all the vehicles were up and running. Everybody could communicate. We could roll out, for our alerts and get the crypto loaded up into them. And, it was a smooth operation. And, so it was kind of it wasn't a difficult thing to put together, right? As long as you kind of follow the system that was laid out before you. And so I was a hero, right? I was done early every day, right? And so come to find out, everybody loved the way I set up all the commo systems and everything was working. They're like, hey, we have a problem with our arms room. You seem to have some time on your hands, so we're going to send you off to school to learn how to fix guns and all that kind of good stuff. And we're going to make you the commo guy or the armorer. And so I was like, all right. So I went off to school, learned all that kind of good stuff and found that it was very, very similar, right? As long as that's the other thing is we got in M1 or the M16A2s, right? They switched. That was right at the time that they switched out from the A1 to the A2. So I got all new weapons shipped in. I put them on a maintenance schedule, set up the arms room, and it nice and pretty, so that it, looked good. I passed all the inspections all the time. And, again, it was like it was pretty easy. I followed all the procedures. I learned that, at my very young, age that, and very inexperienced, Army guy that, man, all this stuff, if you know what the policies and the procedures are and you can implement them in a way that, makes sense, man, you can be done early and go screw off every day in the afternoon, right? So, and still be a hero, trained to standard, not the time, right? I was always, done pretty early. I could help people out if they needed helping, but if not, then, I was off enjoying Germany, met my beautiful wife during that time frame. So,
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, great assignment. Loved it. Got married, while I was there. And
you guys went up to Denmark, right?
I did. Yeah, we did. They had it was the 80s in the Army, and they had this thing called the Darling Denmark tour where you could, pay a nominal fee and they send you off to Denmark and you would have like a Danish justice of the peace, take care of the actual, marriage, the vows and all that kind of good stuff. It was nice and legal. And, and it was kind of like your honeymoon all rolled into one cool trip. Right.
Nice.
So, it was super cool. I knew several people that did that. I don't have time for it here, but if you ever want to hear a funny Darling Denmark story, Hit me up and I'll tell you a good one. It's not about my marriage. It's just about, it's rooted around the whole Darling Denmark tour and whether or not it's legal. So anyway, had, got married in very short order, had a daughter, my daughter, Lauren, and the Army was good. I was doing, I was professionally respected. I was doing a job that, was rewarding. But, there were some challenges, right? I wasn't able, there was not a whole lot of upward mobility, in the commo field. And so I was looking to do something different, started doing some research, kind of landed on counterintelligence. Like if I want to stay in the Army, I'd like to do this counterintelligence thing. It's pretty neat. Now, the research that I did was based off of a list of Bear program MOSs, right?
So, the good old Bear program.
Yeah, the good old Bear program, right? Because, there was still even though I was kind of loving the Army and, starting to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit, I still had a little mercenary streak in me, right? Well,
you had 2 years, right? So you just signed that
right.
document for
2 years, man.
Like,
I hadn't had enough time. There's a lot more Kool-Aid to drink, right? So, I went and did the interview that was required, of counterintelligence agents, right? At least back then, in order to be accepted into the career field, you had to go to a CI field office and be interviewed by the CI folks, that were in the field office, right? So I did that. Funny story for everybody that knows Dave Nordstrom, awesome guy, senior statesman in the counterintelligence community. He didn't do my interview, but he was at the field office there when I went through that interview process. And, didn't know each other at all, but circle about, years and years later, and, he became a good friend. So got all that squared away, found out that I was good to go, that they thought I was ready, ready to, whatever you want to call it, go off to get training and become an agent. And, but the Army had other plans for me because I'd done that, short tour thing. They said, they didn't, the Army, PERSCOM didn't know that I had been accepted is what it boils down to. And as a CI agent, they cut orders before all that.
Oh no!
Got done, right? So I went off to Fort Bliss, Texas, and had to do another tour as a commo guy, right? Now, in hindsight, not a horrible thing to happen, right? So went to Fort Bliss, got to actually work on a rat rig, made some great friends there. In fact, I just had breakfast yesterday with John Calhoun, a good buddy of mine that I met. At Fort Bliss, we did Desert Storm together. We used to be, there was another guy, Mark Spranzo. We were the three amigos while we were downrange. Great guys, great mission. But I didn't become a CI agent until I got back from there, right? Because that's the other thing. I had to wait until Desert Storm ended before I could actually actualize my, dream of becoming a CI agent. And it was a dream at that point in time because there was no money involved because the Bear program expired while all this was transpiring. So, there was no financial, incentive, but I still wanted to be a CI agent. So see, I'm a real hero after all.
Well done. It's funny. You just had breakfast with one of your buddies you hadn't seen since Fort Bliss.
Exactly. Well, yeah, wow. For the most part, I did run into him. We were both, or he was in Hawaii one time when this was still over 20 years ago when I was TDY there. And I linked up with him, but it's been over 20 years since I've seen this guy.
I do love the Army about that, right? You don't see somebody for years and decades sometimes, but you reach out, you say hello, and you reconnect almost immediately. You pick right up where you left off.
It is. It's amazing how you fall. It's like you don't miss a step. You fall right back in, and you're trading jabs, and it's like there's no niceties involved, right? It's just like trading barbs, and just like you never left each other. It's awesome.
Oh, that's great. And that's awesome.
How old were you at the time, going from Germany back to Fort Bliss and then off to Desert Storm? What age range were you at there?
So let's see. I was 25 during Desert Storm, 24, 25 during Desert Storm. Yeah. So, 20 to 24 when I was in Germany, or actually 23. I left Germany when I was 23 years old, right? So 23 to 26 at Fort Bliss. So I became a CI agent at age 26.
And it always amazes me whenever we look back, as I lived through that too, 18 years old in Desert Storm, turned 19 in Saudi Arabia. And you think about the level of responsibility that our government, hands these young people. I mean, here we are all, no experience, and you're in charge of arms rooms and weapons and commo equipment and making sure that commanders can talk on the battlefield. It's just amazing amount of responsibility that we place on our young people in the military. You can't find it anywhere else, I don't think.
Yeah, it is true. You think back to it, I mean, if you got the character and you were raised right and you kind of, that's one of the things that we look for in agents. I mean, we're looking for people that can, that are hungry to succeed, that have, sort of a can-do mentality, that can operate, independently and think for themselves and use logic and all those kind of good things. And, that's because, we find ourselves often in situations where, we have to operate, with little or no guidance on the ground. Right. I mean, there's always guidance. I mean, you've got guidance from your command before you roll out. You've got, policies and procedures and whatnot that kind of tell you what you can and can't do. But ultimately, in our career field, when you're out, on the street, on the ground, deployed, wherever it is that you're working, you are, a bit on an island, right? You have to be able to, recall, what your mandate is, what you have the authority to do, and operate independently, right? Make those decisions that are smart decisions to move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but you have to have confidence that, one, in yourself, and you have to have confidence that your command has your back and, that you're doing the right thing and all that kind of good stuff. Quick war story that, doesn't have anything to do with CI. Hopefully it has some relevance, but it reminded me of when we were down in a Desert Storm, and it's a funny story, so that's why I want to tell it. And here I am, in charge of commo, right, for this task force that's out in the middle of the desert, and our headquarters is back in Riyadh, and then some of them were in Dhafran. But anyway, I'm like, this is pre-cell phone days. I'm the only means of communication that our task force has with, headquarters, right? And the world for that matter, other than our AM radio that, you can kind of tune in the BBC and Voice of America and stuff like that. But anyway, I'm out on the perimeter of the compound where we're staying, because, a rat rig, has this powerful directional antenna that, when I click send, to send a message, it goes hot, and, if anybody were to touch it, they'd be fried pretty instantly. Right. So we're like kind of off on our own. Right. So, and the nearest sort of section, if you will, that was closest to us, which, you could see from where we were set up, was the S4 site where all the supplies and all that kind of stuff was. Right. And they had come over and asked if they could slave power off of our generator, to, make some comforts of home, if you will, in the middle of the desert there. Right. So, team player, I'm like, yeah, sure. You can have some power so you can, listen to a radio or do whatever you're going to do. I said, just please don't do anything that's going to really put a drain on the power, because I got to be able to send traffic. Right. And I got to receive traffic. So I can't go down. Right. So don't run any hot pots, don't run a microwave, or, don't do anything crazy, that's going to suck power. Right. So, and they're like, yeah, no problem. So I plugged them in, and, and it was just a constant battle with these yahoos, because, they do those things anyway. And I'd end up, losing power. Right. And so my commo would go down. I'd have to restart my radios and all this kind of stuff to get, commo back up. And, I threatened them over and over again. Their NCOIC and I were always in a constant fighting match, and I was like an E5 at the time. Right. So here I am, in a fight with this, big old master sergeant, and, anyway, finally they did it one time, and it was like super inconvenient because we were like, had all kinds of traffic coming through, and I was like, that's it, so, and it was a young troop that was on shift that had come and told me what had happened. I was like, God damn it. So I went over and I unplugged him and I threw that plug just as far as I could towards the, S4 site. And my young troop, he had these big old eyeballs. Like, what did you just do? I was like, man, they aren't honoring our agreement. So screw them. We don't have to give them power. And so he's like, all right. So I went back into the, wherever, doing whatever I was doing. And he comes running in a little while later. He's like, Master Sergeant, whatever his name is yelling at me because he wants me to plug him back in. I said, don't you do it. I'll be right there. So I went over there and, went toe to toe with this guy and basically told him to pound sand that, we weren't helping him anymore because he wasn't helping me. And, so anyway, he stomped off, back to his, compound. And I went back to whatever it was I was doing. And, my young troop comes running in with big wide eyes and says, Sarge, there's this, the property book officer is here, the warrant officer. And he's like in my face wanting me to, plug him back in. I said, don't you do it. I'll be right there. So, head out there, now I'm going toe to toe with this, big chief, scary, right? Because, you know how important warrant officers are to the Army, right? Huge, right? So, yeah. So anyway, I listened to him, make his case. And I'm like, look, man, I said, I've been allowing y'all to do this for a while. You don't honor the agreement. You keep shutting me down. So screw you, man. I'm not going to give you any power. He's like, please, I won't let it. I'm giving you my personal guarantee that it isn't going to happen again. And I said, your personal guarantee isn't enough. He says, what do you want? And I said, well, I'd like that tent right there. It was a big A-frame tent they had covering, all their supplies. And he says, it's yours. You can have it. He's like, grab whatever you want from, over there. And just please plug us back in. I give you my guarantee. It won't happen again. I was like, okay. So I plugged him back in and I grabbed my crew. We walked over and we lifted this A-frame tent off of a bunch of supplies and carried it back over. And we were living in like a Bedouin tent, before that, like scavenge, out in the desert. And so our life improved dramatically, and they began to honor, our agreement, and all was well. But yeah, I don't know if there's a lesson there, but the lesson to me is if you're right, you can stand up and defend, your actions, right? So, and there was not much that they could, argue is what it boils down to. So used it to my advantage.
Well, you also had the higher priority mission.
Absolutely.
And you were probably filling that stupid generator up with jerry cans, 3 or 4 times a day, 24-hour shift.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yep, no doubt. All the maintenance and everything that went into it. I mean, there was no way that they could bully me into, without giving me something I wanted. So,
a master sergeant, a warrant officer, good for you standing your ground, Scott, as an E5, probably soon to be E6. You weren't scared by those.
No, I'm not advocating to, stand, to, fight, senior personnel. That's not what I'm saying at all. But if you
just do what's right,
if you're in the right, then, it gives you, you some armor, to deal with, whatever it is that you're dealing with. Right. So,
awesome.
But anyway, that was all good. I, came home from Desert Storm and it was in very short order after that I was off to Fort Huachuca, being, turned into a CI agent and given my badge and sent off to my first assignment, which was awesome. I had a great time, at the training there. It was super cool. And, I wouldn't change it at all. And then my first assignment as a CI agent was basically, somewhat to my dismay, it was another muddy boots assignment, right? I went to an infantry division up in Alaska. I did curse my decision to ever join the Army during the cold weather indoctrination training there, because I don't like the cold, but I got to experience cold like, pretty much nobody ever should while I was up there.
So what happened there, Scott?
Well, they make you go out and annually and do what's called cold weather indoctrination training. And I had like a super, commander that thought it would be a good idea to kind of combine the cold weather indoctrination training, which is really just, you got to go out, you got to spend a night with no heat source. And, once cold weather conditions reach, a certain level where it's like, I can't even remember how many degrees below freezing it has to be, but it's freaking cold, right? So he's like, let's get some extra use out of this. We'll turn this into like a training exercise, because we had some new people that had never been on skis before. So we turned it into sort of a, equipment training type of an exercise, where we snowshoed out to our bivouac site, and then we put on all our skis and battle rattle, and did cross country skiing all day long, in full battle rattle, and then did the cold weather indoctrination training that night, where we spent the night without a heat source, right? So anyway, skiing all day is going to cause you to sweat profusely, even if it's super ass cold out at night. So basically getting ready for bed, as you can imagine, after going and doing all that, and you're like in a little wind tunnel of a poncho hooch tent, that you've built in a pine brow, it was like a wind tunnel, so it was super miserable. That's when I cursed, my decision to ever join the Army. And then the next day we skied home, it was pretty messy too, but
that sounds like good counterintelligence training right there.
It was really good, it was really good, really good CI training,
The Army puts it as an indoctrination. Like, so you have cold weather. Do you have drowning? Do you have like desert heat? Yeah,
right.
The flame. Why is it an indoctrination? Can't we just deal with that when it comes up?
Exactly right. Somebody came up with it, thought it would be a good idea, and it lives on, right? But I will tell you that it's a funny story to tell now, right? And if I had time, I could probably add some color to it and make it really funny. But one of the cool things about having these experiences is that in the counterintelligence field, ultimately, especially in the Army, right? Who's our customer, right? Our customer is Army commanders, right? And so when you as an agent, you come rolling in, because as agents, we wear suits, we come rolling around, we're special, right? So you come rolling in and you got to interact with, a commander, or if you have to conduct, any type of interview for whatever mission that you have as a CI agent. There's a bunch of them. So if you're dealing with a superior, you're dealing with a commander, you're dealing with, soldiers or civilians that have been soldiers, it's super valuable to have been on the ground as a soldier in a line unit. You got muddy boots. You can trade war stories with them. You know where they've been. You can kind of, interact with them in a way where you're talking to them, not as, this CI agent in a suit, but you can talk to them as a soldier, and it makes you real. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Whereas if you don't have those types of experiences, sometimes it can be off-putting, for a commander or for a soldier, to talk to, because, if you don't have that kind of wasta, if you will, when you walk in to the room, you can be operating from a disadvantage in some cases.
So yeah, I think that's spot on, Scott. You're absolutely right. You took the time to lay the foundation of your Army career in the mud, soldier to soldier in that foxhole, able to speak the commander's language, transitioning that from counterintelligence to speak their speak of what you can do. Boy, you've lived it.
Right on, man.
That you're part of the team. You're not somebody external. You've had sucky times too.
That's right. Yeah. It's not all, it's not all bourbon and bar napkins, right? So, but that came pretty quick. So anyway, it was all good. Again, great assignment, met some great people there. But it was super short, really, because that was right after the Gulf War. If you remember, after the Gulf War, they went through what they called Cincos and the drawdown and all that kind of good stuff, where they were going to make the Army, smaller, start folding up units, cutting people, personnel. And so, I jumped on that, as an opportunity to find a unit that was doing real CI work, right? So I remember volunteering. I was beating up the career manager, back at PERSCOM, to go to Fort Gordon to the 513th, because they were, they had forward deployed missions, right? Like in Egypt, where you did real CI work, and so I thought I was good, right? Because nobody wanted to go there, right? Most people are looking to avoid that kind of stuff, right? So he was like,
Right.
"Yeah, you're volunteering for that? I'm all in, right?" So I thought I was good, but then he saw my D-Lab score, and he was like, "Oh, I can't send you there. We're critically short on Korean linguists, and so you're going to go to DLI and learn Korean." And so that worked out for me in the long run, but at the time I was crushed, right? I was like, "Oh man, I got to go learn a language, in some paradise in
I
California."
know.
I mean,
In Monterey, California. Oh,
yeah,
that's going to be awful,
sounds
Scott.
horrible. I got to go to Monterey and Carmel. That sounds awful. I want to, but I wanted to go do real CI work. So anyway, that's where I went. I went to DLI as a CI agent. The staff sergeant at the time. So it added a little bit. I didn't pick up language real easily, right? I think my G-Lab score, I didn't cheat on it, but I think that I must have scored higher than I should have. Maybe I'm a good guesser, but I struggled, a little bit with that language. Plus I was a leader because, I was, once you make E7 there, then you're kind of put in a different world, but I was coming in as an E6. So I was in a leadership position with all the younger troops, which, cut into my time a little bit. But it was still rewarding. Right. And I ended up getting my 2-2 when I rolled out of there. They took pity on me or whatever. And it was, a good time. Right. And, but the best thing that happened to me while I was at DLI was some recruiters for an Army Special Program came rolling through and gave a big presentation at the theater. And I found out that, CI was part of that. And if they picked me up, then I could go do like real CI, the kind of niche CI missions, the strategic CI missions, right? So, running actual national security investigations at a high level, running CI operations. I was like, that's me, man. I want to do that, So I volunteered for that. They put me through the little recruiting ringer, and they ultimately said, "Hey, we're sign here. We're going to bring you on board." And I was like, "Fantastic!" I said, "Do I get a choice? Where I go?" Because I said, "I really want to, run investigations and put bad guys in jail and all that kind of good stuff." And they said, "No, you don't get a choice, and that's not what we're going to have you do." And he said, "We're going to send you to the foreign counterintelligence activity, and you're going to run CI operations." And I was like, "I don't know what that is. You want to rethink that? Because maybe you could find a place where I could run investigations." And they're like, "Nope, we're pretty much set in our mind." So, and I was like, "All right, whatever. It sounds better than what I've been doing, so I'm good, right?" So
it involved cold weather training.
That's right. Yeah, and they were going to send me to Hawaii, where there would be no cold weather training. So that was
awesome.
That was good, right? So I was like, "Oh wow, that would be all right. I'm going to tropical paradise, be a CI agent doing strategic CI work. Sounds like a winner, right?" So off I went, and that was at the time, certainly, I guess it was not a high bar, but that was definitely the best assignment I've ever had. And it was for a while, going out to Hawaii. The crew there was fantastic. The mission was ridiculously good, running CI operations, all over that organization is responsible. Basically the way we do CI operations is each unit has sort of a geographical responsibility, right? So I had the whole Asia Pacific theater that, I got to kind of cruise around in and do, CI operations. So it was awesome. I went there before having gone through the certification training, right? Because there's certification training to learn how to do, advanced foreign CI operations. So, I got my, I guess, feet wet a little bit, just by being there, and being sort of indoctrinated to how business was done. There was it was kind of neat. The program that you run out of FCA is governed by a special access program. So you got to, go through all those hoops. I hadn't jumped through all those hoops yet. So when I first got there, they're like, here, you can read some of this stuff. We can talk to you about some stuff. But I was really kind of doing busy work, if you will, for a little bit, before I got, my polygraph and all that kind of stuff done to get, the read on. And anyway, the story I'm getting at is, everybody was real cool. I noticed that there was a little computer that sat in the corner that nobody ever got on, right? I was like, why is this computer here that sits in a corner and nobody uses it? And they're like, oh, well, that's like that computer connects to Army Personnel Command. And evidently there's like some way that, you can like you can pull data from it, but nobody knows how to use it. So that's why we never use it. And I was like, oh, I said, could it be useful? And they're like, yeah, probably, I don't know. And I was like, well, I'm going to mess with it. Right. I said, there's nothing preventing me from using it. Right. And they're like, no, have at it. So I got on that computer and what it was basically, an interface, if you will, with Army Personnel Command to both, the officer and enlisted personnel programs. Right. And so, that's what all the recruiters in the world probably use, and what the assignment managers use to manage personnel assignments, and whatnot. So all the military personnel data is in there. So I started fiddling around with it and learned that, there were like pre-built queries that, people had run, to identify whatever, right? Depends on the mission of the unit. And so I started fiddling with it. And I went out and I asked these guys, I was like, hey, what kind of information would you want from this system, if you could get it? So like, oh, it would be useful to know this and this and this, how many people in the Army, speak this language, or, whatever, all different, pieces of profile that they said would be useful. And so I went in and found similar queries, and then I expanded upon them and basically was able to spit out, lists of personnel in geographical areas that had certain attributes and whatnot, and they were like amazed. They're like, holy shit, this is fantastic. And they went around, and so they loved it. They were able to use it immediately. Then I was like inundated with requests to run different sort of screens. So the good thing is that I had found a way to be useful, even though I wasn't read on. The bad thing is that I've made myself so useful that nobody else wanted to learn how to do that shit. In fact, they sent me off to school, to become better at it. So
that's awesome, Scott. You're a value-added impact player immediately to the debt as you're waiting to get read on. I mean, some people I've known through my career would just wait it out doing nothing, going house hunting or going to do some in process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of like, yeah, exactly. Couldn't be useful at all to them for a little bit there, but then I figured out a way to, be useful until I got, to the point where I could, actually go out and do things, right? Once I got my ticket punched and read on and all that kind of good stuff. So great tour, right? So, they sent me off to, like I said, I got to work a little bit, with these guys before they sent me off to school, and it really armed me to do well, at school when I came back to go through the Foreign Counterintelligence Training Academy, which was top-notch training. It was back then. It was run by the Army. The Foreign Counterintelligence Activity actually owned the training and ran it out of one of their CONUS-based detachments, and it was awesome. It's the most realistic training I'd ever been through. Super thorough. Prepared me really well, and it was good, right? Because I'd had a little bit of exposure, so I had kind of confidence coming through the school. And it helped me be value added to my classmates, right? Because most of them hadn't had any exposure to some of the missions at all. But so I was able to, kind of help them. So that was, rewarding in and of itself. But it also, it kind of goes to, once you have some experience under your belt, even though it wasn't much, I was confident going through the school, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that later, right? So the school, it was super rewarding, graduated, went back to, the detachment in Hawaii, and really, just started just running, is what it boils down to. Running CI operations all over the place, right? It was like a drug. I loved it, and then I had probably, for me personally, the most fortunate event that could have ever happened, right? So, my mentor had to don Corona. I'll talk about that later. He had to go on a series of TDYs, and he was going to be out of pocket for like 6 months. And then due to some other weird circumstances that occurred, my other teammates also were unable to travel, right? And so these teams were really small, right? We had really small teams back in the day. They're much bigger now, right? But back then it was just a handful. It was like 4 of us, right, that were on each team. And so I found myself the only guy that could travel and run these CI operations. And so that was scary to me, right? Because I'm kind of green. But it probably could have been nothing better that could happen to me, right? Because I had a command team that was like super supportive. I had demonstrated, enough to where they thought that I was competent enough to where they would let me, go out and do these things on my own. I mean, if my team chief was available, he would come with me, but that was not often. And so, my commander, my ops officer, my team chief, they all had confidence in me and let me go out and basically run CI operations all over that theater of the world all by myself, right? And so that was, one, scary, like I said, because I was green, but two, that was super empowering to have that much faith by my command put into me, to go out and do these things, right? Because these operations, they have some risk involved in them, right? But they put enough confidence and belief in me to let me go out and do things. And, I made mistakes. Bob Leinemock, God bless him, he was my ops officer. He certainly called me a dumbass a few times, right? When I would come back and he would debrief me, but he would just, pump me up and, let me go back out. Right. And, so just a great experience. Right. So did some things that had never been done before in CI operations during this time frame. Had some big successes and certainly ran through the op cycle, multiple times, during this time period. Right. So not quite 6 months, but a pretty good chunk of time. Right. And so nothing really broke. I didn't have any major mistakes that occurred. Like I said, had some big wins along the way, and it just made me super confident, right? I mean, now, I haven't been around long. I was really green, just a few months ago, but I've been so exposed to the operations cycle in such a fire hose kind of way, that now I had like all kinds of confidence, right? Now I could like have the weirdest shit happen to me on the ground, and I would take no time at all in coming to a decision about what we needed to do to move forward. And I could be relatively confident that I was making the right decision because, one, I had when I got to the unit, and I wasn't able to do a whole hell of a lot, in addition to working on that, that PERSCOM, computer. The one thing that was available to me was all the regulations on, that govern, how you conduct CI operations. What are my authorities? How do you do them? What policies are in place that, give me the authority to go do these things, right? What can I not do? So I'd really, spent a huge amount of time reading and becoming familiar with all those policies because there wasn't a whole lot else that I could do, right? But that's the foundation for being good at whatever your craft is understanding, the policy behind it. Because sooner or later, you're going to come across a situation that you haven't trained for, that you didn't foresee coming, right? But if you know what the policies and regulations are, you can kind of come to an idea on what it is that you need to do, right? And you should do it. 9 times out of 10, your instinct is going to be correct, right? But fear keeps us sometimes from making decisions, right? So the other thing you need other than training, and understanding of policy, and experience, you need to have a command that supports you, because then you're willing to, make those decisions knowing that, if something goes a little bit sideways, well, at least they've got your back. You know what I'm saying? So, and I had all those things working for me there. So it was awesome.
And you have repeated yourself when it comes into the various career fields you were at, whether you were, running commo, putting a commo cell together, the armorer, and now, a CI practitioner. And I think the common theme you keep saying is know your craft, know the policy, know the procedures, know the processes, set the foundation there, and everything else with a little bit of hard work and some mentorship and some guidance, you're out there crushing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's, you got to take care of all those things, right? So, um, if you understand, what your authorities are and what the policies are, then that gives you a good base. If you've had some training, that's great too, because then you've got something that you can kind of fall back on that gives you a framework about how you go about doing things. And those are good. But then it's really the experience, and that's what accelerated my career, was the experience of actually going out on my own, running operations for a pretty prolonged period of time without any other input, and having to kind of rely on myself. And I'd come back and I'd be pretty confident that I had done the right thing. But then give that back brief to your team chief and the OPSO and the commander, and if they're all nodding their head and saying, yeah, good job, then that's exactly what you should have done. I mean, that just reinforces that, okay, I made good decisions, and then, and if I made a bad decision and they course correct me, but it's not the end of the world, and that's great feedback too, right? So, all that kind of, boosts your confidence, right? And that makes you a better CI agent too, right? So, I mean, if you walk in and you're confident and you got nothing to back it up, it can sometimes lead to some trouble, right? Because there are certainly people that, that will walk in and they act like they know what they're doing, but they got nothing to back it up, right? So that's why you need to make sure that, you have all of those sort of foundational things taken care of, right? And then even if you're not confident, if you have enough experience layered on top of your policy knowledge and your training and your experience, then you're going to be in a much better shape. And then you will be confident, right? Because experience breeds confidence, because you've done it before, you've been exposed to things, you've had to make decisions when something weird happened that you didn't anticipate, and you came out of it, okay, right? Or if you didn't, you learned from it, you're not going to do that again. So what is it? What's good?
I also want to bring up the human aspect of all of this too. I mean, you've got a young wife, you've got young children at the house. I know you're traveling all the time because there was no short locations from Hawaii to anywhere where you had to go to operations. Yeah. So you were gone all the time. You couldn't talk to your wife about the things that you were doing. Hell, you couldn't even get right onto the projects, and you were Army counterintelligence at the time. So
right.
Being able to balance all of that out as a younger soldier, relatively speaking, just complicates life altogether. And to be able to balance it all and handle it all speaks highly to your level of maturity and the way that you were able to rock star this thing out over the years.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's some of it's it's not luck, right? Because I had a hand in choosing who I married, right? So but funny story, my wife, she recognized that I was going into a world where I wasn't going to be able to talk, about work too much. But we would still, talk when I would come back from a trip. She'd be like, how'd it go? And I'd tell her whether, how I was feeling about it. And, and for all the aspiring CI agents out there, I mean, it is a lot of work, but I mean, you can find time while you're on the road to do things that are enjoyable. I remember I used to, link up, because when I say I was out on my own, I was running the operation on my own, but there were support people out there that, I would link up with at field offices or, things along those lines. So I occasionally would meet up with, a colleague for, drinks, or, we'd go out and maybe play a round of golf in the morning because I didn't have anything to do in the afternoon or evening. Right. So it'd be funny, right? I'd come back from one of these trips and, Chrissy, my wife, she'd be like, so how'd it go? I'd be like, oh, it went good. All the work stuff went really good. I met so-and-so, we played golf, had dinner with so-and-so. And she'd be like, oh, why do you even come home?
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny, Scott.
But anyway, great tour, right? In Hawaii. After that, I did, I went to Korea after that. And that was, I didn't have any bad tours, right? So this was another great great tour, and it gave me an opportunity to do some of those things that I had originally wanted to do as a CI agent, right? So this was not an operational assignment. This assignment was where I basically worked full spectrum counterintelligence stuff, right? So I commanded surveillance teams. I ran national security investigations. I put together sort of a defensive, source network to alert us to, different, threats in the area. It was awesome. I mean, it was a couple of years of running around, Korea, doing, the rest of those missions that I, had always, wanted to do, and just never had the opportunity to. And it was awesome. It was a great crew, there as well, some seasoned investigators that, kind of Rick Swim and Scott Grant, to advise and, kind of mentor me into, and to the rest of the CI craft, and gave me, just world of experience that, paid huge dividends, on down the line for the rest of my career.
What's that called?
That's great.
Project.
What's that?
I said, was that brigade projects team at the time? Was that the beginning of BPT?
It was when I first. It was when I left. When I first got there, it was in the battalion. It was in the 524th MI battalion. It was the Special Operations branch. SPOOPs is what we called it. But at the end of the time, Wendell Corson was the brigade senior, MICEP, and we had, it wasn't all roses. It was all fun, but we sometimes had some command challenges being that far down, in the command, group, and so they ended up pulling us up, to the brigade, by the time that I left out of there, and we reflagged as the brigade projects team.
Oh, nice. Conducting full spectrum counterintelligence, Scott, and more importantly, putting that Korean language use, I suspect.
Yeah, so it had been a few years since I'd spoken any Korean, so it did come in handy. You certainly, it certainly is useful, to speak the language when you're in any foreign country, right? And so, so it did come back. I was able to use it, a bit. I do regret that, that was my last time when I left there. When was that? 2000. So it's been 24 years now since I've spoken Korean, and it's pretty much dead to me now, right? I don't speak any anymore. I can recognize phrases here and there. I can go into a Korean restaurant and be cordial, with them, is what it boils down to. But if they try to trap me into a conversation, I'm in trouble. But yeah, it's good.
So the Korea timeframe, Scott, as well, I think, is when you transition from the NCO rank over to being a warrant officer. Am I off, or is that accurate?
It's generally that time frame. So I became a warrant officer before I went to Korea.
Gotcha.
So that was my first assignment as a warrant officer. So I was a wobbly one in Korea.
A Woj.
Yeah, wobbly one. So yeah, I was the OIC for that SPOOPs team, and then the brigade projects team. So good times, So, and it was interesting, right? So I remember rolling in there. We had like a major case, I was going to have to do a subject, interview, and not long after that, we had another case that popped that was a DA significant case where we had to, we had to put a surveillance team from scratch because there was, some animosity between the command there and the actual surveillance team for the Army. So they're like, well, you're here, you have experience doing that stuff, so you're going to build a surveillance team and employ them for this investigation. So that was cool too, right? I had so we put together a surveillance team super fast to, put this, live against, a subject of an investigation. And it worked. It all worked out. I was super glad that the subject was not a hard target, but it was still fun. That's another good story that I probably don't have time to go into, is that whole training thing. So if you want a good surveillance story, hit me up and I'll be glad to tell it to you, in some other time, right? Because that one would take a while. But yeah, good times there. Full exposure to all the different aspects of the CI mission, which was awesome. But again, I hadn't done those things before. But again, great crew that had experience with these things, to kind of bounce ideas off of. And by that time I was just a confident CI agent and figured that I could figure it out, even if I if I hadn't done it. I mean, I'd done interviews and all the pieces parts I'd done, just not in that sort of in that sort of framework, if you will, right? So it was all good.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned it because I was with Brigade Projects team, later Brigade Operations Element from 2010 to 2013. So you have laid the foundation for the work that we were doing a decade later. But you mentioned something about coming out of the ops course and hitting the ground running. And I know exactly what you're talking about because I did exactly the same thing. Came out of the ops course and then worked day and night for like the next 8 weeks as soon as I got back to Korea from the course. And Bull Crable was like, "Good, you're certified now. Go execute."
Yeah.
Me and Walter Harvey during that 8-week period, but the most fun I ever had as a counterintelligence professional was that 3-year assignment that I had in Korea. Just an exceptional experience.
Oh yeah, it was a good time. Yeah, if I'd quite frankly, I fought, to try to go to the 513th, back in the day, right? But I wasn't, I was a stupid, CI agent that hadn't been anywhere, right? So I was like, oh, if I'd have known how much, CI work could be done in Korea, I would have been all over that, right? So it all worked out. I got there eventually, right? Probably a better mission than I would have had, if I had gone initially, right? But yeah, awesome, good stuff. So let's see. From Korea, I as my tour wound down, I had the opportunity to come back CONUS, right? So I went to FCA back in Fort Meade area, right? So it was the 902nd by that time, right? So and that was an awesome tour as well, right? I mean, I had the guys that I was working with there were freaking top notch, right? So I mean, especially the latter half of that tour, there were some guys that came in that were just super professional CI guys. But the whole time I was there, it was a good crew, and had a great time. I remember I fell in on an operation that I had started when I was in Hawaii, right? So I mean, so that was kind of cool, right? I like started it, and now I'm jumping in on it, a little bit later, right? A couple of years later. So that was pretty fun. And I enjoyed it because, I knew a lot of people by then. I had a pretty good professional reputation by then. So, I walked in there and it was easy. I walked in and, given a desk, given a, handful of cases to run, and, it was off and great stuff. Right. So, already kind of walked in as I was the guy that they wanted to pair new people with, so it was awesome. The one thing that I will speak to is that even though I had a fantastic time there, the overseas assignments seem to be, I don't know, to some degree more rewarding, right? So the mission, is not significantly better, right? Because you're doing the same mission, but I think just the environment of being overseas, kind of breeds some camaraderie that you don't get in CONUS-based assignments. In CONUS-based assignments, all your teammates got, certainly family, that are living just more dispersed than they do overseas. And then they have a wider circle of friends and family that they're, bugging out, to go see on weekends and whatnot. Whereas, when you're overseas, it's kind of more us, kind of taking care of one another type of thing. So, I loved the mission there. I had a great time, at Fort Meade, but to some degree, it didn't have quite the same, camaraderie kind of thing going for it that your overseas assignments do. But it's not to say that we didn't have a good time, right? I mean, we worked well together. We would get together for happy hour, once a week, and play poker, all that kind of good stuff, right? So I mean, good, and it was a great crew. So I did a lot of cool things during that assignment. The OIF kicked off, while I was there. I had the opportunity to run one of the CI operations that had a significant impact on OIF, and so that was kind of actually like a pinnacle kind of assignment. I mean, I remember talking to some of my colleagues that, were working on that, at the same time. We're like, man, this thing's working like a champ. I mean, what the hell are we going to do after this? I mean, it's like, so it was really, really rewarding is what it boils down to. And, for all the CI operations that I've run, over the before and since, that was, one, it was, a time of war, right? Which doesn't come along all the time. Right. And then two, it was, it was significant enough to where, all the different, support mechanisms that go into making these things, worked flawlessly, right? Which is not always the case, right? Because sometimes, when we're doing CI work, you have, different stakeholders that have different agendas and different objectives and different, so there's all these competing requirements, competing objectives. And so sometimes, there's more work into like getting everybody to cooperate than there is, and, actually executing, the operation. And in this case, everybody was rowing in the same direction, and everything, came together, and it was a resounding, success is what it boils down to. So it was an operation that they teach at the schoolhouse these days, even all these years later, right? It's 20 plus years later is what it boils down to. And they still kind of teach it as a sort of a hallmark of what, a good CI operation, can achieve, and there's lots of reasons that we do them and lots of different types of objectives, but this was kind of a holy grail pinnacle kind of, CI operation. So that was super rewarding and fun.
Yeah, Scott, I think you're underselling the significance this operation had, and I know you have to work in the cone of silence, if you will, and you can't talk a lot about it, but just everything you did for that whole operation, from the start through the completion, the time, energy, foresight, preparation, everything that you did. I know you can't talk about it. You know who did, though? Tommy Franks, retired general. In his book, An American Soldier, if you look on page 434 and 435, Tommy calls it Operation April Fool. Give it a look. Know that Scott's the mastermind behind that thing and saving thousands of lives and money and just across the board. The impact this operation had, I don't think anybody can explain the significance. That's how highly successful it was.
Yeah, it was successful. I wouldn't call myself a mastermind, but I did start the operation and end it, right? So I was the only one out of all the folks that I worked with that that was playing a role throughout the whole thing, minus a short period where I had a little accident that took me out of action for a bit. But yeah, good time, super rewarding. And quite frankly, it all went back to all those things that I talked about, before, right? I mean, it was a command team that was super supportive and enabling. There was some cutting edge stuff that we did there, and there was some risks that we took. Is what it boils down to. That that we wouldn't have been able to do without support. From a command team that was enabling, right? So good times. So after that, I kind of ended my Army career. After that, I basically managed the CI program that recruited people like myself and you guys, to do these types of missions, right? So that's where I finished out my my Army career, and that was good. Got to kind of use those kind of skills that we learned about figuring out what makes people tick and apply them to recruiting the right people into carrying the torch on, in our CI career field. Right. So that was super cool. I retired and stayed, in that general area, in the Fort Meade area. Cause my kids were, kind of coming up on that, time where it would be wrong to rip them out of school. Right. Cause they had built, friends and circles and, kind of wanted, I think a lot of people do that, right? They try to stay, in the military, try to stabilize, for their families, at least, especially during that sort of sensitive time frame where our children are becoming adults, right? So so transition, did some similar stuff, for as a civilian. I thought I was going to go off and become a contractor, but it was a good time. The government, was, pretty generous, with, steps and ratings and whatnot, to hire you back into the government, kind of keep the talent around. So I took that opportunity to go ahead and stay with the government and joined the MISEP program and continue to do CI work for the Army, and eventually went back to back to Fort Meade. So right back after a couple of years hiatus, went back to the detachment there at Fort Meade and worked with that crew. Jeremy, you were there at the time, and then you went off to Germany, and I followed pretty soon after that because I had the opportunity to become the ops chief over in Germany for FCA. And it was weird, right? Because that was a transition to a leadership position that I had purposefully thought, that I didn't really want, right? So when I went back to Fort Meade, I became an executive case officer, was the billet, right? So, which was great, right? Because it was non-supervisory. I didn't have to supervise anybody. I just had to, run CI operations, so that was, to me, that was like the dream job, right? Just
Hashtag winning.
yeah, run CI operations, kind of coach and mentor, people, that have less experience than me, and life was going to be good, and it was awesome. But when that opportunity to go to Germany, popped open, as an ops, chief over there, it was like a confluence of events, right? So I knew the crew that was going to be over there, and I was like, it's top tier, people that I wanted to work with, and my kids, my son was joining the Army and leaving, my daughter was in school and relatively independent, and so I was like, man, what an opportunity to, I should jump on it, right? And there comes a time where you kind of look around and you're like, who's available to lead, or take it over, and you're like, well, I guess I ought to do it, is what it boils down to. It's kind of selfish not to, right? So I did it, right? Somewhat reluctantly, just because it's not the most comfortable place to be. That's just my psyche, right? But I jumped on that, and it was, with heart half full, because, half full because, I know the quality of the people I'm going to go, be around, and the mission's great, and it's Germany. I mean, how bad could that be, right? But at the same time, I was going to be leaving the street, and put into a position where I had to, kind of oversee things and not run things anymore. So, but looking back on it, it's best decision I could have made. It was an amazing, assignment. I lived vicariously, through you and some of your colleagues, all of our teammates over there, because it was a different kind of rewarding. It was rewarding to enable, the team to go out and do great stuff, and then I didn't get to do it. I just got to hear about it and read about it, and coordinate it, defend it, all that kind of good stuff, right? To coordinate us to get to the point where we could actually do some of the things. I mean, and I had a great time doing that too. I realized pretty quickly that it's a different kind of rewarding, but there's a lot of stakeholders when it comes to doing these types of things, right? Different U.S. organizations that we have to that have stake in it. You have to kind of coordinate with and make sure that everybody's taken care of as far as their equity goes. And then there's we're doing stuff overseas, so sometimes there's foreign partners that that we need to coordinate with to make sure that their needs are taken care of. So it was just a super, different, kind of experience for me that I had kind of taken for granted. Because even though, I'd been on the street and certainly had supervisors and, people, doing all these things in the background to enable me to run, these different types of, operations, I had, never, had a great appreciation for how much effort, they had to put into it, to knock it out. So it was, awakening a little bit, and certainly rewarding in a different aspect. But there was no better feeling than having, a wide-eyed, troop come back or case officer come back and tell the story about how something went right, and that's awesome. So
You're right. Yeah, I think you've come full circle, Scott. So to be honest with you, Bob Leinbach, he's calling you a dumbass. You sitting in the seat as the OO, you call me a dumbass quite a bit. What are you doing? But yeah, you got your mentorship out there, your ability to lead and really just provide that kind of recommendations, the oversight, the mentorship. I really progressed a lot of our operations at my own terms, right? We're a little stale there for a minute, but you're coming in with the vision, you and Scott Colson, and really push the operations to the brink. And man, because of the transition from Frankfurt down and the moves and everything like that, boy, we picked up and ran from 0 to 200 quick.
Yeah, it was super fun. Yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better situation to walk into. Yeah, loved it.
And you're right, that just being overseas, I think the family bonds that we had, I agree with you 100%. Being OCONUS is great. A lot of great work, a lot of great people. Just being overseas, though, the camaraderie you form. We spent so many Thanksgiving, Christmases, all these different events. You ran with the Bulls. I watched you run with the Bulls from a balcony that was safe over the street. Just so many opportunities and team building and just getting to be truly a family was amazing.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, I will tell you that there's no assignment that I can look back on and really say, equaled it, right? Just because of that environment that we were in, the opportunity to, do things together, was unmatched, and just the quality of the people, like you said, it was amazing, right? But I do think that overseas assignments are the best, but that assignment in Germany where, we were all kind of, at sort of a senior stage in our careers, right? So there was a lot of things that we could do that maybe if we were younger, we might not have been able to do, right? So like, hitting the road together, on personal travel, right? We'd ski every year, I mean, it was just
great.
Awesome stuff.
Well, I always found that working overseas too, always added a level of complexity from a security standpoint, just from a personal security standpoint, than it did working in the United States. I mean, we're in the States; it's pretty safe. You don't have to worry about a foreign intelligence service or security service breathing down your neck and watching what you're doing. But all of that comes into play when you're overseas. So from a family standpoint and a team bonding type standpoint, it's interesting. But from an operational, it almost feels like you're in the Badlands, and it just makes it a little bit more spicy than what you would do inside the United States.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And, especially in the time frame that we're talking about, right? So, I mean, things, when we worked in the States for a long time, we kind of took it for granted that, we're the home team and we own the landscape, right? That's changed a little bit with technology. But aside from technology, that it still applies when you're overseas. There are much more significant risks, right? And so, Europe is, that's a pretty easy playground, for our adversaries, right? If they can get into the Schengen zone one way or another, then they got free reign, all over Europe, right? So, I mean, it's pretty interesting, right? So yes, you do have to, it does most definitely add a layer of complexity to both personal and professional activities when you're OCONUS. I agree 100%. So let's see. Anyway, when we were in Germany, I had mentioned before that there were a bunch of colleagues that, from our, Army colleagues that had moved over to DIA, and they had stood up a CI operations capability there, right? And there were a lot of things about that I found kind of interesting, right? Because they had built it kind of in a way to incorporate all the best ways of doing things that we knew, from our careers, right? So they kind of built a leaner, faster organization to do the CI types of activities that, we wanted to be able to do. And I jumped on the opportunity to go join them. Plus, I will admit, when I was talking to these guys, I went there to get back on the street. Right. So I had really enjoyed, my time, but I was like, all the stuff, living vicarious through you guys was like getting me jonesing to get back on the street. Right. So I figured that was an opportunity. So I went there and, unfortunately they had gone, like, I don't know, it must have happened. Surely it happened like between the time I took off on a plane and landed, there must have been some sort of cataclysmic event, where they suddenly, were in need of a leader. Right. So I got there and I ended up being a team leader instead of an operator. So, but that's what they needed me to do, is the right thing to do. So I went ahead and jumped on it. Right. So anyway, another great outfit, had a good time there. Certainly, it was rewarding to be, because it was still young, right? The organization was still, not terribly, mature, but they were doing great stuff, and they had, kind of a way of going about, business that was far more enabling, in my opinion, than the Army, right? The Army had, had some, had become a little bit more complex in as far as, the procedures that were required to get things going. And even, once you were in the throes of, conducting CI activities, sometimes, there was just, a complex, machine that, you had to kind of feed in order to conduct CI activities, right? Whereas, I walked into DIA thinking it was going to be a little bit more lean based on my conversations with those guys, and it didn't take long for me to realize that it was much more lean, right? It was much more enabling. So, and that was super rewarding, right? So we had better access to the leaders, that authorized us to do the activities. We had better access to some of the support mechanisms that enabled us to do some of the activities. So it was built for success, is what it boils down to. So kudos to all those guys for the way that they, originally set it up. And it was very rewarding to be, added to that team. Right. And so all the stuff that I did with those guys was super fun. The number of operations that, I was able to work or supervise that were impactful, kind of really, to me, it was amazing, right? That, because, there's, you can work a CI activity and it can, not have impact and do everything right, and walk away feeling good about it. But, I felt like the number of activities that we were doing there that were like just hitting on all cylinders and meeting requirements was really off the charts. So it was super rewarding. And then I found myself in short order, again, to, just weird circumstances. One, I got promoted to oversee sort of their like support infrastructure that, provided like analysis and some of the tools that, are needed to enable CI operations. And I hadn't even like warmed that seat when I ended up in a position where, I had to serve as the acting division chief, right? So, and so that was another scary thing. Like, I'd never led a geographically dispersed, organization, of that, of that had a mission of that scale. And so it's a little bit scary, but, all super professional people. And, again, rewarded with a command team that, had my back and, was, supportive. And so it all worked out pretty good. We also, had to overcome some oversight challenges that were no fault of our own, but I mean, it was a time frame where we had to like, basically prove to, our oversight chain, outside of DOD that, or at the top of DOD and outside of DOD that, hey, we know what we're doing. We have processes in place. So that's that whole, full circle to showing them that, hey, all of our processes and procedures are in place. We're operating within the bounds. Everything's groovy. And, so we, passed some inspections with flying colors and all that kind of good stuff, and enabled us to, finally, ramp up to full speed. And it was good. And then the biggest challenge probably that I had there was when we ended up with a mandate to merge two operational capabilities, right? So I was acting or chief of the the CI operations division, or actually it wasn't called that then. It was just the OFGO division or OFGO base. And then the Stetson Compass was the sort of cyber, had the cyber mission, right? Did a lot of like CI collection in the cyber domain, right? And so we ended up with this mandate because, kind of DoD requirements were changing, and the environment was such that it wasn't my idea. Our command decided it would be advantageous for us to merge those two platforms into one, to make the cyber and the OFGO platforms, merge them, make one division out of them, right? So I ended up kind of having to champion that, right? And so that was quite the heavy lift. I didn't realize it, but in hindsight, that was a huge challenge. There's those are two very different cultures, right? So we all come from sort of the operations background, where you have some, not everybody's a type A, but everybody's got a little bit of type A in them, right? So where they they're more just forward leaning, can work kind of in a gray area, comfortably, because we've been out, and tasked with conducting these CI activities without a lot of oversight, and rely on ourselves. So it's just there's a type of person that is comfortable going out and doing that and being successful at it, and it breeds a sort of culture, right? And then you've got the folks that have this CI collection and cyber domain mission, which also very capable professionals, but they operate basically in sort of an operational platform, where they come to work, they do their thing. It's all in cyberspace. They have good ideas. They go out and do good missions, right? But there's a lot more oversight that's right there, that they can rely upon. And it's a different type of culture, right? So, and having to smurge those two into one and make a new, culture was challenging, right? So, and everybody was suspicious, right? It's like, oh, you're this is a hostile takeover, or like there was some sort of malicious intent, which was not the case. It was, let's bring the best of these worlds together and make one better world where all of this can be utilized, in a way that defeats our adversaries, more completely, right? So the mechanism that I used to try to initially get everybody over that hump, because there was clear evidence that there was resistance to it, was basically I brought everybody home, so all of our overseas folks brought home, and everybody had a full stop week where everybody was gonna it was an event, right? We're gonna have a, whatever you want to call it, all hands for a week. So everybody came home on Monday. On Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we had an all hands, right? So I carved out some space at NGA. They have big classrooms there at the NGA's university, and I was able to get a big classroom set aside, big enough to handle all of us, and we set up kind of an event. So I remember the sort of structure of the event was, on day one, we had each team lead from each team in both organizations basically pitch all their successes, right? Because nobody, the two organizations weren't overly familiar with what a win looked like, on the other side, right? So we basically, had all the teams talk about, all the cool stuff that they were doing, so they could go up and kind of pound their chest and talk about what badasses they were, and how they won the day against adversaries and all that kind of good stuff. So, and that was enlightening to a lot of people that didn't have a good understanding for the complexity of the activities that the others were running, and what went behind them and how it was done and what the results were. So that was good. And then on the second day, had everybody take, as you can imagine, when everybody came in, they all sat in their little little teams and groups, right? So there was no intermingling of people on day one, so I kind of figured that would happen, and it did, right? So on day 2, I had our staff psychologist administer, these sort of psychological profile tests, so that we could figure out what everybody's, sort of favorite way of dealing with other people was. And then, I had our analytical team provide like an overview of what the bad guys look like, what our requirements are, what are we supposed to be doing? How are we supposed to be going after, each of the, bad guys, each of the, our adversaries. And the purpose of that was, hey, the requirements that we have as CI professionals apply to everybody, not just to the OFCO guys and not just to the cyber guys, right? So they're all the same adversaries, they're all the same requirements, and we got to get after them, right, in the best way that we can, right? So, and then I had our staff psychologist break everybody up into small groups so that, there was people of different personality types and people from different, mission sets, seated together for the next day, right? So, and then the next day I had everybody come in and they had to design operations from the ground up using all the tools available from all the experts, at their table, and we like handed out, targets for everybody to come up with ideas. And it all worked out pretty good, right? I mean, they came up with some great ideas. They had to get up and brief them. They didn't just, come up with them and they sat in the corner, right? They had to get up and brief them. And then we actually ended up utilizing several of the ideas that they came up with to start, new operations. So, and I got good feedback from, the participants that they, they found value in it. They had a new appreciation for, what everybody brought to the table, and we're, and it started, to think about, hey, how can we integrate these capabilities to be, more effective? But that was like step 1, in trying to get, everybody, on the same sheet of music, rowing in the same direction as one team. We put people, move people around so that, we had people down in both platforms and all that kind of good stuff. So, and, it was a start. I hear, that they're doing great stuff. So, I mean, I've long left, right? But it seems to have been, a small step to get them on the right path, and it seems to be working now. So it's validating and feels good.
Man, Scott, you're a true master. Let me tell you, right? It's one thing to run an adversary or against, an operation against an adversary to protect equity, but when you do it to a team that have come from 2 different type of backgrounds, to get them together to pitch plans in a cohesive way and build that team, well done, good sir. True master right there. Always be assessing, and you were doing. You pulled the doc in, you administer testing, you change the teams up, you refocus people. Good Lord.
Yeah, so it was good times, man. It's a great mission there. But yeah, I mean, that was the beginning. Once I left the CI operations division, I did some time as a L&O to the FBI for DIA at the counterintelligence division there, enabling our investigations and whatever mission needed to be coordinated with the bureau. So that was eye-opening and rewarding. And then I ended up kind of managing our career field towards the end, like right before I retired.
And Scott, when do you retire?
So I retired in 2022, and I thought that I was just going to ride off into the sunset and take up fishing, or which I did to some degree, but infrequently.
Once a year.
But yeah, so I mean, I thought my kind of career was behind me, and then I ended up doing a project with Joe Simon. He brought me on to do a project, with MITRE, which was super rewarding, and then Jeremy and I had already started talking a little bit, and we ended up just deciding to go ahead and pull the trigger and come up with a name for a company and go after this training requirement, right? So when we were kind of wargaming this thing, Jeremy had one, he had some contracting experience, so he kind of understood, how the acquisitions process worked. He had been an instructor down at JCETA. We had both talked, along with other colleagues about, the fact that there seemed to be a gap, between, the training that we receive as, young agents, and then the advanced, CI course that, enables us to do sort of the, higher level strategic CI missions. And there was really nothing that prepared you to go and do, that advanced level CI training. We saw that as a gap. And so we founded our company, IXN Solutions, that you talked about, up front, and scored our first contract as a sub to a really good outfit called Ridgeline. And we've been kind of off and running ever since, right? So I will tell you that, one thing that, Jeremy knew it to some degree, and I'd seen it myself, and that is that, government contracting, is certainly, something that can be rewarding, but it's also painstakingly slow process to work your way into one, competing for, and then ultimately being awarded, a contract. It's freaking slow, right? And one of the things that we had talked about is hey, maybe we need to, there seems to be a gap in industry, for CI as well. Probably moves a little bit quicker. And we had been talking about maybe taking the company in that direction when we found out that, you were in the market to jump into that fray. So but that brings us up to speed is what it boils down to.
Yeah, and I will tell you that one of the really interesting, because every team has their own dynamic. And what I found, it's only been 90 days now, maybe roughly around 90 days. And I'm a bit of a dreamer. You may have already noticed this. My head is in the clouds. I'm thinking, long term and big picture and that sort of thing. And your true ops officer mindset comes out during those times, Scott, and kind of back down to reality. Like, okay, Ryan, time out. Talk this thing through. There's a lot of steps that we have to go through to get to that point. And it's just brilliant that you just throw a flag on the play. All right, take a knee, Ryan. And so I love that's what makes the team so great, in my opinion.
No, I appreciate it, man. It's funny, right? Because you and Jeremy are very similar, right? You have great ideas. You can see the end. You know exactly what it's supposed to look like, and you can kind of backwards plan, and you kind of have this plan in place, right? But yeah, sometimes you don't think about some of the obstacles that are going to come along the way that we're going to have to hurdle before we get there, right? So always got to be ready to stiff arm and work your way around the obstacles that are going to come into your way. So.
That's what I love about our team. We're doing it. We're getting after it. We came up with the name Identify, Exploit, Neutralize Solutions, getting after it, starting with the government contracts. Scott, you briefly it on the courses. Do you mind just providing a little overview of the two different courses that we currently have in line?
Sure. Yeah. So, the two courses that, kind of served as our foundation was one is a preparatory course for the advanced foreign, CI qualifications course. Not adversaries. Sometimes there are adversaries. Our colleagues on the human side, they have a pretty extensive qualifications course that they go to, and they have a preparatory course that kind of sets them up for success and prepares them to be able to go off to their long training course to become certified. And so that's what our course does, right? So for the CI community, we have a CI operations qualifications course, and so what we offer is a 2-week course to kind of get folks prepared, an understanding of the operation cycles so that they are better equipped to go down and pass the qualifications course. More importantly, it gives us an opportunity to evaluate their potential and advise our client on the potential that the students that they're thinking about sending through what their readiness is, to go down and succeed. So, and the kind of thing that's really cool about it is we take, the ops cycle that we're all familiar with, executing over the years, and we, break it down, over multiple days, and we provide classroom instruction on, this is how it's supposed to work. And then we do demonstrations to show them what a version of right looks like, because there's no one right way, to do anything really in the CI world. So, but we'll give them demonstrations of, what right looks like, because I think that a lot of people gain value from seeing something performed, and they can kind of, take that on a little bit better, than just, getting it in a slide or, in a classroom, and then we put them through practical exercises, and we provide feedback, all along the way for the entire ops cycle. So we've gotten super good feedback, from all the students that have participated in it. And we've had good success from metrics like, the number of people that have been through our class that we've recommended, would be successful at the AFSCIOC, actually graduating. So I think the graduation, the throughput has gone from a 40% washout rate to a 0% washout rate when it comes to folks that we've, trained and recommended. And then the other course that we provide is a sort of re-greening, if you will, of CI folks, right? So that, if you're in a CI career, you have, you have your operational CI assignments that you go to, you have skills that you have to employ when you're out, conducting CI activities at any, operational CI assignment. If you're in the field office, you have to be familiar with all the different aspects of CI and perform different types of CI activities. But it's not unfortunate, because it's great experience, but oftentimes you need to go off and do a staff assignment, or, you go and do some sort of an assignment where you're not really conducting CI activities, right? And that's all well and good. And some people end up having several assignments back to back where that kind of thing happens. But, those skills can, atrophy, or maybe, change a little bit, and so not change, but policies can change a little bit. And so we got a course also where, folks that have been kind of in that bucket of people that have been away from an operational CI assignment can come through a 1-week course that we offer, where we, reacquaint them, with all the different, aspects of CI, all the functions of CI, and then the actual conduct of some of the CI activities that they'll find themselves performing, in an operational CI assignment. And we use the same principles, right? We give them classroom overview on policies and all that kind of good stuff, but, and then we do demonstrations on different types of CI activities that they're going to have to perform. And then we put them, through a practical exercise as well. Multiple practical exercises. So that's super fun.
Yeah, I love the approach we've taken with these classes we're putting together. And we have a couple other clients out there, but I think there's a couple things that sets us apart. That number one is being tailored. I've been to plenty of training where it's, for lack of a better term, cookie cutter, kind of just brush strokes, but understanding a client's requirement and then digging in to make specific training that will be value added. It's been a lot of fun to develop. We've done this a couple different times. I think, Scott, we're in the process now with another course, and man, it's been a lot of fun tailoring specific training.
Yeah, it's awesome, right? I mean, when it's awesome to bring the tools that we use as active CI agents, and bring them to the table, and sort of we found a way to make be the government better, right? CI agents in the government, imparting all those experiences and skills to them to help them sort of tighten shock group on their capabilities. And then now, in addition to the training thing, especially with, Ryan coming on board, we're taking all of our CI experience, and we've come up with some, ideas that we're bringing to fruition to make the corporate, side of the house a little bit better, especially the defense industrial base. And we're taking advantage of the fact that there are, full circle, some policies and requirements, that are out there that the defense industrial base has to adhere to, right, in order to comply, with government regulations and whatnot that are in the counterintelligence and insider threat space. And we've come up with this wicked cool tool to help them do it better.
Much, much better. Yeah, it's been awesome to have Ryan on board. Ryan, you said it was 90 days ago. Man, it feels like yesterday. We've come a long way in 90 days, have we not?
We really have come a long way. The last 90 days have flown by. A lot of great engagements with different corporate entities, different industries, critical infrastructure companies, financial companies, just as many different organizations as you could possibly come up against. And it's been great having the conversations. We think we have the secret sauce to make corporate security better, to make interoperability between cyber, the employee base, liaison, open source intelligence. We think we have what every organization needs to make their security more robust, more holistic. And it's just been exciting to see it play out. I mean, what was well, I don't think we've named it yet, but 351X that we're building. I mean, we came up with that concept, I think September 8th, on or about that day. And 37 days later, I mean, we're into beta testing. I don't know any tech company that moves that fast. And it's just been exciting. It's been an exciting ride. I can't wait to see where it takes us from here.
Man, it's 8th September. That is wild to me. You're right. You were just talking about it for a couple of weeks, and we're like, you know what? We're done talking about it. We were talking about it for 2 days. Let's do it. We tagged up with Stripe Labs, and we're beta testing, gentlemen. We're actually going to sell market in January. It's been a lot of fun. Ryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what 351X is?
Yeah. So what I found in security, and especially in corporate security, is that there's 4 primary channels that information flows back to the security team. And that's through employee reporting, cybersecurity alerts, open source intelligence, and liaison. Well, 2 of those 4 can be automated. That's the OSINT piece and the cybersecurity tooling piece. The other aspect of that is liaison, and that's owned by the corporate security team when they're out interfacing with government agencies, whether it's intelligence organizations or law enforcement. It's also when they're meeting with their peers and learning what other industries are coming up against. But it's up to that security professional to database and keep records on those things. So we knew that was a critical part of that formula. But the hardest one, I think, to get right, and the one that everybody seems to fail at the most, is employee reporting. And so our first module in 351X was designed to capture that employee reporting, which, oh, by the way, is required by the NISPOM and C3, especially for those in the defense industrial base. But it's a good practice for even corporate entities that are not associated with the defense industry. But it's everything that these employees are encountering day to day, from suspicious activity reports to foreign travel, foreign contacts, unsolicited correspondence, things that are happening in their lives that could impact them from a negative standpoint. But being able to collect and gather and have that information readily at hand, and then to be able to analyze and assess it over time, definitely highlights threats and risks to every organization. So that's the one that we started out first with. That's the one that's in beta testing. And I'm telling you, it's magic. It's going to be the tipping cue that we're always looking for. And I think Scott referenced it whenever he was discussing DIA off-co base, whenever they brought the cyber side of the house to the human side of it, and working that problem set back and forth. It's the magic.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, I love what we're doing with 351X and that compliancy piece, right? For the defense industry base out there, helping them with that employee reporting and for their DCSA contacts and everything like that. Boy, the amount of time that the FSOs or the security representatives are going to save when they're having to send this information off, we streamline that process. Not only is it good for that, but like Ryan just said, we're going to find the real bad guys operating in your company. It's going to protect your information. It's going to make sure your bottom line's not affected by an insider threat. And we're doing it. Love it. Hey, Scott, I got a question for you. Why 351X?
So 351X, yeah, sure. So 351, for those of you in Army counterintelligence, that 351 is the nomenclature for the CI technician MOS. So 351 Lima is the actual nomenclature for a CI technician. So we took the 351, and then X is the letter that is attached to your member number for that special program that I talked about earlier, or alluded to earlier anyway. So 351X is sort of a mashup, if you will, and an homage to our CI warrant officer backgrounds, since we're the ones that conceived of this software tool, and it's a software tool that's rooted in counterintelligence principles, right? So 351X, it's all about CI, and the human aspect of it is the first module of it. So yeah, that's how it came into being, 351X.
Boom. I love it. I love the name. Our homage to our good old Army CI days, being retired warrant officer inside that special program. A lot of fun. Scott, we appreciate you telling us the story. If we're looking at IXN, what do you all think? What are we offering to everybody besides protecting equity and a software solution?
Oh, so yeah. So I mean, one of the original thought was, hey, everybody does CI a little bit different, so we need to make a tool that's available so that everybody can do it in the same way, right? So we think that we have a nice software solution, but not every, and so I think the software solution is something that really everybody in the defense industrial base probably needs. I mean, quite frankly, outside of the defense industrial base, just any company that has, equity that they want to protect, this, the foundational part of an insider threat program involves, basically the types of activities that this tool will help you build a program and kind of capture the data you need to build out a program. But, while everybody, we believe, that's in that space can use this software, there are going to be some companies that have either no or a less mature, CI or insider threat program, and maybe they need some help. So in addition to the software, we will be happy to, help either through just offering, consulting services to kind of help you with your, program, or, quite frankly, if you don't have a program, or maybe if you're thinking that, it's too expensive for you to maintain your current program, we will actually be happy, to serve as sort of a fractional insider threat program for you, right? So where, basically you can outsource that to us, and we would be happy to talk to anybody that would be interested in, that type of a capability to, allow us to, help you build your, or maintain your, or improve your insider threat program.
Brian?
Yeah, I think it's the future. When you take a look at the economics of having an insider threat program within an organization, you're looking at a minimum of 1 to 3 employees full time, and the technologies to support their activities. It can range anywhere from $350,000 to $1 million a year annually, just to maintain an insider threat presence. And when you take a look at the insider threat professionals and what they do day to day, I mean, of course, they're going to talk about training and awareness, which is extremely important to make sure the employee base understands what threats and risks are out there, how they'll present themselves, and then give them an outlet to report those threats and risks to. Then there's also investigations. So if you take a look annually, most companies, I would think in the mid-size range, have anywhere between 10 to 20 significant investigations a year. If you're a smaller company, you're probably looking at maybe 1 to 6 per year. And so it doesn't justify keeping a full-time staff from an insider threat perspective. We believe that by deploying our software package 351X into an organization, building the policies, building the relationships, and building the oversight and control with employee relations, management, and legal, that we could do that remotely and save companies a significant amount of money in doing that. So it just makes good business sense. Plus, we're going to consolidate all the expertise at IXN Solutions, and so now you're tapping into 100 years worth of counterintelligence expertise. It just makes great business sense to do it that way. And we see other industries doing that, especially on the cybersecurity side, where they have remote security operations centers and GSOCs and all kinds of stuff where they're doing those types of things, the monitoring, the investigations remotely, because it just makes sense to do that.
Yeah, whether it's consulting, training, or the software solutions that we offer, you're going to get CI solutions that are tailored to meet your needs from a competent bench of professionals. We're here to help if you ever need it out there, audience. Scott, you are the epitome of a leader and a professional and a subject matter expert. Thank you for sharing your story, brother. It's fascinating to me every time. How you've just moved through your whole career, laying the foundation by understanding authorities and policy, putting operations together against the adversary to protect the equities of the Army and DIA, and then masterfully building a team without them knowing it, and building the team where it's enduring and lasting. Man, it's such a great way to kick off episode 1, talking to a true professional, a master of the craft. Scott, thanks for taking the time this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, man. It's been a great time. I love working with you guys every day, and it's kind of fun to talk about my background a little bit. I hope somebody got something out of it.
So many gems. Scott, if our audience had questions, how can they reach out to you?
A couple of ways. They can hit me up at my email address. It's sparks@ixnsolutions.com. If you can't remember that, but you can remember IXN Solutions. Just go to ixnsolutions.com, hit up our website. All of our contact info is there. You can actually even, book a consult there. You don't have to have a business consult. You could just hit me up to, talk. So you can do it that way as well. Or, I'm on LinkedIn, DM me. It's all those ways are good.
Well, Jeremy, our episode 1, we hope that the audience got something out of this great story. I hope Scott did too. It's therapeutic to talk through a career, to put it out there. I hope he appreciated that. I know I enjoyed the conversation. This is a great way to start our new podcast. We got many, many more great stories to go through as time goes by. It's the holiday season. Even though there's downtime on the horizon, we're going to jam in a lot of different episodes over the coming weeks. And I'm so excited about it. This is going to be fantastic.
We have a pretty healthy schedule here the next 2 weeks, Ryan. We're going to be busy.
I think so. I think we're going to tap into many different audiences. So it's, historically we've focused on Army. Army is our background. Army is our network. But man, we're going to expand into Air Force OSI. We've got some NCIS potentially on the horizon. We've got corporate. It's going to be an interesting ride, to say the least.
Yeah, I agree.
And thanks guys for letting me be first up so I could set the bar, low. Yeah.
Oh, whatever. Oh, crazy. Hey, Scott, do you have any last parting thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I guess, especially for our aspiring CI agents that might be on the wire, I would say that, always, I always, know what your policies are, right? I kind of alluded to that several times, right? So that's important. You should make sure that you understand your craft so that you can, have a good base from which to operate. I would say that you also need to make sure you gravitate to, a good mentor, somebody that's going, that and respect and knows their craft, that you can kind of, side saddle, or not side saddle, but, somebody that you can, watch work and kind of develop, into a solid CI agent. I'll give a shout out to Don Corona. Don Corona was my mentor. And he certainly showed me the right way to do business and, and helped build my confidence as an agent. And, I've been in more than one, occasion where, I go, what would Don do, to kind of help, shape my response or the way I want to go ahead and execute some sort of an activity. But yeah, a mentor is super important. And there are programs where they'll assign you a mentor, and that's all well and good. That's useful. But I would say, when you go to a new assignment, just pay attention, who are the people that command respect, who are the people that really know the craft, and hopefully you can, the best mentorships are, kind of organic, right? You choose each other, and make each other better. And then, the other one is don't hesitate to jump on opportunities, right? Volunteer for cool missions, volunteer for the hard jobs, get that experience, right? Because, experience, makes you better, right? It gives you, that experience is going to give you the tools that you need to overcome, things that happen in the future where you don't have experiences, right? If you don't have experience in something and it happens to you, you can at least fall back on previous experiences to kind of formulate your plan, is what it boils down to. So experience breeds confidence, right? So I'll end up with this, right? So you want to have confidence and control, in any situation that you roll into as a CI agent. And so, that confidence, comes from experience. And once you have experience, you become competent, right? And then if you have confidence and competence working for you, you're going to be able to exercise control over the situation and not let it get ahead of you. So those are three things that we like to, always say that we want our agents to have when they enter, the room or, enter into any problem set, is confidence, competence, and control.
Love it. Love it. The 3 C's. Ryan?
Wonderful. Well, yeah, everything Scott said is just fantastic. Great episode. Episode 1, Cyprus.
Love it.
Jeremy, you got
Follow us on LinkedIn if you liked it. If you have recommendations, please reach out to us. If you want us to dig into a topic, just let us know what that is and we'll dig into it. Or better yet, if you want to be a guest, let's make it happen. Reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn. Our website is www.ixnsolutions.com. And feel free to email us anytime. Great episode. Awesome time, guys. Boom.
all right.
Bye.
And we'll get the obligatory GFY in there.